What is up, fellow sickos? I am Dan Favale, joined by, as always, my certified fantabulous co-host, Mr. Grant Hughes. The first podcast of 2025. This is coming out on New Year's Day because we don't really give a shit about what day of the week it is. We just put out content as we can fit it into our schedule. We are talking about our biggest questions for every NBA contender, with some of those contenders being put in quotation marks. Mr. Hughes, we're recording this right before the new year is rung in, so I'm not going to ask you how your 2025 is going. I could do the thing where I say, I'll see you next year, and then you can give me that smirk. But how are you doing as we close out 2024?
I'm doing really well. You reminded me that the I'll see you next year thing, like ha ha ha, is real big among second graders. I learned that I learned that from my son, who's just like got to say it the other day and was like really satisfied.
So is it coming back around? Because are you considered a millennial?
I think I'm right on the borderline. I don't identify as a millennial, Dan. I prefer not to.
So what's the generation before millennials? Gen X?
I'm so stupid and bad about this. I think it's Gen X.
That's the one that is still getting a kick out of because my older sister is part of that generation. And I feel like those are the people that are very like, see you next year. And then you have to like put on the, like that face. But also I feel like when you go to places, maybe in retail too, they'll like, but it's always some of the older people say it is maybe a joke, or like they think I don't have an actual issue with it, but it's nice to know that it felt like it was fading out. Like I don't encounter it as much anymore, but it seems like it's going to come back around. So shout out to Mac.
Luck. Yes. Yeah. I think, and Gen X really, I don't think a millennial has ever done anything funny, right? Gen X is the last comedic generation. Who have I alienated with that? I don't know. People talk about like, oh, millennials are this way and Gen Z is this way and Gen X is this way. I don't know where the cutoffs are. Like, I don't know any of that stuff.
I don't know where. I know that I'm firmly a millennial, so that makes it easier, but millennials are also, we ruined the world, I guess.
Right.
All our avocado toast was a thing. That's why no one could afford houses.
They were supposed to save it, and look where we are. Okay, so as we move into the future, I just want to surprise you with, I'm moving into the past and being fully analog because I have handwritten notes today. Can you see that on the look?
Do you always have handwritten notes?
No, I'm trying something new. I used to do a lot more handwriting, not cursive because I can't do that anymore, I don't think, but written by hand. And I just like absorb, this is my Gen X talking. I just absorb information better if I'm reading it like from a physical thing and or writing it on a physical thing. Even now, like typing is a different, we type a bajillion words every year, but like something about handwriting. So I'm going to try it. You'll hear shuffling papers as we're talking today. So that's some nice ASMR to the pod.
That's some Zach Lowe shit. Because he swears by that. And look, he doesn't have his podcast out right now. So if you need the low post replacement, here we are.
And we still do. So clearly we're better and always were.
Maybe I should try that. But I do feel like when I'm typing things, so my notes, I have a document, a Google Doc, so millennial over here. But like, I do feel like I'm taking it in more rather than like, sometimes I'll just like map out a blueprint in my head, depending on the topic. So maybe the next level is, okay, now let me get a legal pad like Grant has. I'm going to write. That's just so much more time consuming.
This could go to shit. We'll find out. So what is the topic we're going to talk about today, though?
Well, we have questions for every contender and criteria. How did we approach this, Grant? It's
very scientific. So one thing is, we're taking the teams as they are. This isn't what you were driving at with the criteria, but like, the question can't be, can they acquire Jimmy Butler or what like that? Like we're not, as we're talking about questions, we're also sort of pointing out weaknesses, and the weakness can't be does not have Zach LaVine or does not have Jimmy. That's not the spirit of this. That's one thing, but mainly like this is a weird year, and we've talked about it several different times, but isolating the contender class is tricky, and there's a lot of teams that could be in it. And we've gone probably farther than we need to in terms of the length of this list. But the basics are, and now I can't remember what level we said they had to get to, but essentially, if they made the finals, it can't shock you. And we could even extend that to like conference finals.
That's how I approached it.
Okay.
Would it surprise you if this team was in the conference finals?
So like it could be a mild surprise, or you'd have to say like, oh, X, Y, and Z must have gone right, or like X, Y, and Z didn't go wrong, depending on which teams we're going to talk about. But it can't be like, no way. You can't, it's like the facial expression for those of you watching would be like, if Team X made the finals and you were like, what? Like, did a full double take? Not a contender. But if it was like, huh, like that's still contender class. Like if it's just like a slightly bemused like exclamation, that's going to qualify. So I don't know how many teams we have. I didn't count, but there are a
Don't
lot of
spoil it for the kids.
and
It's
not a
lot.
lot of shocked faces. So that's kind of where we are. Did I forget anything about our scientific criteria?
No, that was ultra scientific, and I think it's going to make for an excellent discussion that is 100% inarguable. First up, the reigning champion Boston Celtics. What is our biggest question for them, Mr. Hughes?
For me, for a lot of this, the biggest question was trying to think of what question I ask about them, because this is kind of our no notes team. They've moved into the no notes category several months ago and have stayed there. So you're kind of hunting for like what you can't say. Can Kristaps Porzingis stay healthy? You can't say like that. That's not the spirit of this, or I didn't anyway. Maybe you went that way. So a couple like small things. It's like, can they force some turnovers? Do they need to? That's like a relative weakness. I don't know if they need to do that to get out and run because they have the number 2 half court offense. So like not a problem there. I'm just running down the things I thought of before and dismissed.
Really quickly. I did the exact same thing with them because it was just like, there wasn't anything that felt worth zeroing in on to make an in-depth discussion. That's just a bunch of like these stray concerns.
So what I landed on is Drew Holiday slipping a little bit, like as my question. And like the thing with a player like him is we're 32% from 3 when I put these numbers together. It's right around there. And
you have him at 32%.
I have him at 32 proprietarily. I have him at 32.6% when I did these numbers, which is like 4 days ago. So that could be wrong by now. But so that wouldn't matter to me so much because he does all of these like marginal additions are like off the charts with him. Like, oh, the defense, the smarts, the this, that, and the other can do everything, takes nothing off the table. But there was that Memphis game where the Grizzlies just left him alone and, won that game because he shot 17 threes. It's just an insane number of threes and didn't make enough. And really was the first instance, in the last 18 months where you looked at the Celtics and were like, oh, that's an exploitable weakness that somebody like picked at. I don't know that that's like anything Boston's remotely concerned about going forward because he could just make those shots or they'll figure out how to, counter that defensive scheme. And it's not like every team's trying that either. So that's the best I got is Drew Holiday going to be a good enough shooter to not get ignored in a way that maybe makes things harder for Boston than we saw during last season's playoffs. But like we're grasping at straws here.
Yeah, that kind of, I went bit like more generalized and said, are they more vulnerable this year? Because I think at the start, it felt like they were less vulnerable. Drew Holiday's shooting is a part of that. Even Jaylen Brown's 3-point shooting. Kristaps is not shooting that well from 3 this year. Then you do have his health. They're allowing a higher percentage of shots to go in at the rim, even though they don't allow a ton of shots at the rim to go in general. And then don't they feel, I don't know if it's just because Sam Hauser has been battling a back injury, but don't they feel thinner on the wings all of a sudden, which doesn't necessarily make sense because this is pretty much the same roster as last year?
Yeah, a little bit. I think Pritchard, I don't know if they're thinner, at least now they got another guy that sure seems like he's basically a starting caliber player, but yeah, he's not a wing. So your point, yeah, they've always kind of quietly been thin at the wing, right? Whenever we have to come up with a trade target for them, it's always like guys like O'Shea Brissett, who like wound up on the team for a while there, but like
that's why they feel more vulnerable. He's not there.
Well, they just need. It always feels like they need that guy. Like the one. If you had to put some kind of positional need, that would be it. But like, I don't know, they're going to win 60 whatever games, and it just have experience now. It's really hard to have like a salient question for them.
Yeah, there's just I can't. Everything we just mentioned, if we had to measure our concern level for it,
it's like
mine would be at like a 1.5.
Right. Yeah.
Who we got next?
Dan, this is the Cleveland Cavaliers. It has a better record than the Celtics so far. Are on pace for 72 wins as we record this. What question do you have about them?
So I have 2 questions. One really quickly. When are we going to take the Cavs super seriously? They right now have a top 5 net rating of all time. At some point, we can't start rehashing the 2023 playoffs. But my actual question does kind of align with that of what is their primary weakness right now? And I think you can point to different things of, do they have another gear on the glass? They're in the bottom 10 of both offensive and defensive rebounding. They're in the 35th percentile of offensive rebounding and 37th percentile of defensive rebounding with both of their bigs on the court. That's been basically ingrained into the makeup of this team. You also have opponents are shooting 40% from three against the starting five. And I think, or excuse me, with the core four on the court. And I think that's the thing I'm kind of lasering in on is like, there could be noise in there, but is there a size issue on the perimeter to where, no, they're not giving up a ton of wide open threes. Opponents are shooting like 41.5% on them, which is the second highest mark in the league. But I look at it and say, well, because if you're going to play a Okoro with Mitchell and Garland, you're not especially big on the perimeter. And so is that going to make it easier for teams to get off those shots, even if they are quote unquote contested? And I think you go back and watch, the answer can sometimes feel like yes there. And then the other question I would have too, this again was another team I had trouble settling on. Will Isaac Okoro's 3-point shooting hold into the playoffs? Because this is kind of year two of, oh, he's hitting his threes in the regular season. How much does that matter if he's not going to hit him in the playoffs? And that might make the actual question of who is the best. Like, this is the cliche question, but do they have the best possible fifth member to attach to their core four to optimize what's going to happen in the playoffs? Where is it Dean Wade? Is it Max Strus? Is it Isaac Okoro? Should it be someone else? You can even get into, and not all of our teams will be as scattered, I promise. It's just this team has been so good.
Right.
Like the George Niang minutes have been really good this year. Like, do you want an upgrade at that spot, though, headed into the postseason? Will Karis LeVert continue to play this well, especially on defense? And the answer to that might just be yes, because this is what, year 2 or 3 of him really ratcheting it up. I don't know if you have any thing different to add on them.
No, that's real. So I didn't go the direction you did, which is I think makes this interesting. I think it's kind of fascinating to, when you're viewing the Cavs, like obviously their best players are playing great, but it's also the case that like all these guys that you would slot in to that fifth spot that are like admittedly imperfect in some way, like whatever it is, or have been viewed that way. Like Dean Wade can do this, and Karis LeVert can do this, and Ty Jerome does this, and Max Strus does this, and Isaac Okoro does this. Like none of them are giving you all of what you want from that spot. So I think the answer to your question is like, no, they don't have the optimal fifth guy, but all these suboptimal fifth guys, and like Jerome doesn't really fit that category, but it ties into these role guys are playing incredibly well and shooting like beyond any expectation. And so it's like, we're not going to get an answer to, do they have the optimal guy? Or at least we haven't so far, because like all these guys that are just like, well, he'll do, are playing incredibly well. And like to my eye, and this ties into my question for them, is like, just, is this offense and shooting specifically sustainable? Because you've mentioned it, like LeVert and Okoro and Jerome and just everybody is lights out. It's been incredible. Not just threes, right? Which they do lead. They're 41.5% from three. That's leading the league. The Wolves led the league last year at 39.6. So we're 2% better than last year's league leader, which is like, doesn't sound like a lot, but that's enormous. So like when regression comes, which it just has to, what's that look like? I think that I have no questions about the defense. I just think the defense is going to be good.
So you're not, you think the 3-point stuff is more noise than
I think I hadn't even, to be honest, I hadn't thought about that, but like, I think if I looked into it more closely, maybe I'd be persuaded. But to me, like if there's something that feels harder to sustain to me, it's the offense, because like even get down to like, they don't shoot a lot of mid-rangers, but they have the highest conversion rate in the league from short mid-range and mid-range overall. Sorry, now I'm going to consult my handwritten notes. Yeah. And Jerome is leading that. Like these guys aren't going to be this good all year. Most of these like supplementary players. So like, does that just mean they're going to win 65 games or, 67 instead of 70 plus that they're on pace for? And is that a problem? Probably not. But that's where my eye went, was just the shooting is, nobody shoots like this over a full season.
And I had no natural way to work this in. I wanted to show Evan Mobley's the photo for anyone watching on YouTube, because he's shooting like 50-something% on 3.5 3-point attempts per game in the month of December, which is, that'll cool off. But we've seen, look, Ty Jerome has already cooled off looking at December. Max Strus is not shooting well since returning to the lineup. They've won every game he's played there. I think, what are they? They've only lost one game. They only lost one game in December. So do you think that's why? Because might actually be the question about the Cavs. Why doesn't it seem like they're being taken as seriously as Boston or OKC and maybe even a Dallas? Do you think it's more so because of the hot shooting up and down the, like, is that, if you had to pinpoint it, do you think that's it? Or do you think people are just kind of overthinking this at this point? Because as I mentioned at the top, I don't expect this to hold, but they right now have like a top 5 net rating of all time. Why can't we just accept that they're a legitimate threat to win it all? It still feels like there's a little hand wringing going on here.
I think that's totally right. And I think it's really interesting because like what you want to say in answer to your question is like, well, because they haven't done it yet, right? Like they haven't proved it, like, which I don't know. I think it's kind of an outdated thought, but I do still find myself kind of buying into the whole idea of you don't just go from like first round out to, they won a playoff series last year, right? It was a rock
just barely against the Magic.
Yeah, right. It was just so they sort of have satisfied the criteria of like, okay, you got bounced, then you advanced around. And so like incrementally, it's not crazy to be, viewed as a title threat. I think it's like the combination of the Celtics have done it and are close to as good statistically. And then it does seem unfair that we view them differently than the Thunder. Because what have the Thunder proved more in the postseason than Cleveland? Like, not really. They were anointed preseason in a way that Cleveland wasn't. But I mean, I don't know. It is a little unfair. I think it's just that there's enough of we haven't proved it. Like, I think Cleveland really is subject to the let's see it before we believe it thing. I don't know. I don't really know why that is.
I view them, the first 3 teams, we're about to get to the next one. I view these are the teams that we're stretching here. Like these 3 teams to me are caps lock title contenders.
Yeah, right.
Speaking of which, could you talk to us about the Dallas Mavericks, Mr. Hughes?
Well, just to give you a little, I'm going to turn to my second page of handwritten notes because I had 2 other teams that I thought of in this tier before them. This is the correct tier, though. I don't think Dallas belongs up there with. We
didn't tier them. This is alphabetical for anyone listening.
But. Right. But I had, so Boston and Cleveland were in my top tier. There's another team that is up there, obviously. But Dallas is right in that
Golden
section.
State? Wow, that seems like a
Yeah. I just have a feeling. Jonathan Kuminga had 30 points in back-to-back games, Dan. I don't know if you know that. So this is like less statistical, I think. I just wonder if Dallas has enough from their 3-and-D players to like just improve on what they got last year, which is like would be winning the finals because they made the finals last year. And I think so. Just looking at the percentages, like basically other than Najee Marshall, like, so I'm talking about PJ Washington, Clay, Quentin Grimes. Those guys are all between like 38 and 42% from 3. No problem. The 3 is satisfied. Marshall hasn't hit, but he's really more there for the defense side of it. And the problem is like defensively, basically everyone's kind of grading out as average, just looking at like defensive LeBron on B-ball index. Clay has actually graded out best defensively of that group, which does,
really?
Yeah, which is like, I don't know. That's a good metric, but I'm skeptical of it. Nobody's great. Like nobody's great. Nobody's terrible. Everybody's kind of around the average, and Clay's been slightly better. But like, those are the spots because you're going to get, assuming he's healthy. We're not going to say, can Luka get healthy from this calf thing? Because obviously that's a question. Assume he will. It's just going to be, do they get enough made open threes from their supplementary players, and can those guys defend? And I don't know the answer to that yet because it's hard for me to believe Klay Thompson is going to be your best, perimeter defender. I think that's probably Washington. Maybe Exum. I don't know. Is Exum supposed to come back this year? I feel like he's like fallen off of my radar, but that's my question. I don't know. I hope you went something more statistically in depth. Those role guys have to be, are they good enough? That's the only thing I'm not sure about.
Yeah. I have something that's kind of similar to it. Do they need to go out and get someone who checks more of the, like both ends of the floor boxes on the wing? Because I think if you're looking, Dorian Finney-Smith got traded to the Lakers. This wasn't my first immediate thought, but it was like, oh, that would have been perfect for the Dallas Mavericks, where, maybe you want someone with a little more ball skills. When you're looking at your top end lineup, that 5th spot still feels like it's up for grabs. And any answer that you want to throw in there, it feels like you leave sort of a void with where Klay Thompson, I'm going to have questions about him defensively in the playoffs still. Maybe he just proves us wrong there. Yeah. Quentin Grimes, is he big enough? Najee Marshall, can he stick with the coverages you want to hit enough of his threes and maybe not get suspended? But I'm team Najee versus when you go down to that suspension, if anybody cares, hashtag team Najee. So I think that's a fair question with them. The other thing that's just a little, this hasn't generated a lot of buzz, but this team is on paper, like they're really huge. And yet Luka and Quentin Grimes are the only players who grade out as above average rebounders for their position. according to Cleaning the Glass. So when we're talking about finding that two-way guy, like a Dorian Finney-Smith isn't going to help you on the glass. Do they need to take a flyer on like a backup big who does more for them on the glass than a Kleba or a Daniel Gafford? And then look, we've seen them up Derek Lively's minutes, like where it's not this split share at the center, like not as equal as it was. But like, do you need someone else who might be, okay, if we know Derek Lively's going to top out at what? Let's say he tops out at 35 minutes a game. Like, do you need a more versatile option than a Gafford or even a Kleba, who like a more traditional big than a Kleba who's more versatile than Gafford to kind of soak up that time? So that was like, that's kind of my other question with them is like, why isn't this team better at rebounding? And like, that's been, there's a lot at, to be clear, they're actually grabbing a larger share of defensive rebounding than they were last year, but they're still 25th just overall. And like for the size they have on this team, and I know that's always like a lot of the time that's been a knock against Daniel Gafford. That's just something I'm kind of monitoring. But I think it speaks to, if you want to focus on that, how good this team is that we're splitting hairs. Like they're winning the non-Luka minutes this year, so they're going to be fine. Like he's going to be out. And by the way, the other thing is when you look at the time players are spending off ball this year, there's like maybe 7 players who have seen that off ball percentage go up more than Luka. And between that, and now there's this injury, obviously, he's just going to be fresher than he's ever been for the playoffs now. And that should terrify the rest of the league. And so this was another team where I didn't necessarily struggle, but like, we're not talking about high level concerns here at the moment, right?
No, I think, it's the cornerstones, the rough ideas are like, we've got proof of concept. We understand how Dallas can make a finals. Like it's just a question of, can they get enough supplementary stuff from their role guys, whether it's a big, whether it's, a rebounder, whether it's 3-point shooting to like get over.
I do think it's the wing area is probably the more pressing need, but like this team, just looking at the size to be 25th in defensive rebounding is it's off-putting. Who's next up?
This is the Denver Nuggets, and I think it's your turn to come up with a question for them first.
Why? My question for them is, this team going to operate at a high enough level defensively to actually be a contender? Because this is the first, if you left the Nuggets off, I would understand type deal. And their defense has been all over the place this year. They're 20th in points allowed per possession. They're 18th in half court defensive rating. They are getting blasted in transition at points. I know Aaron Gordon has missed time this year. They're slightly above average with him on the floor. I think the buzzword or buzzwords or buzz phrase has been screen navigation with them because they don't have Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. I think you need to start getting into more of, okay, well, what does that mean? Like Christian Brown is not as good navigating screens as Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. What's the consequence of that, or what's the trickle down effect? And it does, when you're watching them, it feels like it's leading to just more quality looks in the half court, and opponents aren't necessarily nuking them from deep, but they're taking more shots from deep this year than they were last year. They are technically one of the better teams at limiting wide open threes, but you've seen an increase in the share of shots that account as wide open threes if you're a Denver Nuggets opponent. They're slightly, I think you're probably, with the amount of threes Denver takes, the fact that they only lose the 3-point battle by a little bit more than 6 points a game is probably a W, but their rim defense this year is noticeably worse, even though they don't allow a ton of opportunities there. They are 8th. This was, I was actually shocked when I saw this. They rank 8th in points allowed per possession against pick and roll ball handlers. They're not a good team at like closing out or defending spot ups. I just look at this personnel, and I just threw a lot of just stuff out there. They're confusing the hell out of me. And even when you dig into their tier of performances, Grant, they are 15th in points allowed per possession against top 10 offenses. They're 14th in points allowed per possession against offenses 11 through 20. And they're 25th in points allowed per possession against bottom 10 offenses. And so it makes you wonder, is there a play better button there? And Jamal Murray's kind of talked about it, where he's just openly admitted, like, yeah, I've been really bad on defense at points. And there's certain games where it feels like it takes this team way too long to turn it on. And I don't think they have that margin for error. And I'll wrap it up with this. My actual thought on their defense is what losing Bruce Brown, who they couldn't have kept, and then losing Kentavious Caldwell-Pope did, is it just exhausted your defensive stores too much to the point where everyone has to take on more responsibility. And so Christian Brown, as an example, more offensive responsibility on top of defensive responsibility, naturally it feels like it's led to maybe not slippage on defense, but when you're worried about his screen navigation, feels like he's dying on more of them. Aaron Gordon feels like he has to wear more hats. You look at even a Peyton Watson, or a Michael Porter Jr., anecdotally speaking, doesn't feel like they're making as many plays around the basket defensively anymore because the scope of their responsibility has just increased. And it feels like that is what is happening here with them. And as of right now, before you respond to this, if I had to answer my own question, the answer is no to me. I don't know if you feel any differently.
It's tough. I definitely give them. So I wouldn't have felt good about leaving them out of the contender class, just almost irrationally, just because, well, they have Jokic and they'll figure it out. Like that's not an argument, but that's kind of how I felt. So I actually fixated on the defense too. I kind of have two for them, but the one I raised, I think what you said really kind of crystallized it for me, because I was looking at how they're about 4 per 100 worse defensively with Jokic on the floor. And so I started looking into like, oh no, are we back to where the argument was before he disproved it? Can you build a defense that is good enough to win a championship with Jokic in it? And for several years, I think he answered that affirmatively. Like he can be good enough in a system if you use him the right way. And so what you're talking about squares with what I was looking at. It doesn't feel like it's Jokic defensively that like is really the problem. It's that opponents are just making a lot of jumpers when he's on the floor. And that ties to what you're talking about, which is like a bad screen navigation, clumsy closeouts, like just, it's not just Jokic. I do think anecdotally Jokic has looked worse on defense, but I wouldn't cite him as the like principal problem with what's going on defensively.
I'd be curious
to see what you're saying.
Yeah. And doesn't it seem like they're using him more conservatively? And maybe that speaks to, they almost have to do that because can you bring Jokic? I would have to see data on it. Maybe I'm just missing something, but can he come out as aggressively when, sometimes like you're just looking at the perimeter defenders and they just don't feel as equipped to cover up behind him anymore? And that's, again, Contavious Caldwell-Pope wasn't doing that, but he put you in a position where it was easier for the other guys to have then done that. And I'm wondering if that's sort of like a trickle down effect of losing him as well.
Yeah. I think they've just, they've peeled off a key guy every year for the last couple. And so like that eventually just adds up if the Watsons and the Browns of the world can't do exactly those things or can't like do what they do well in support of these other good players that matter. Like it's attrition. You're losing guys that matter. And I think, and you're getting a year older too, and piling up injuries at key positions. The other issue I was going to raise or question was just like, it's really basic, but it sort of, if the answer to this is no, then nothing else matters, which is, can Jamal Murray play like an all-star? Like
consistently.
Just consistent. Like, because if the answer is no, then it doesn't really matter how much better the defense can get. And like, I just don't, as great as we agree Jokic is, I think he needs some help. Like he needs somebody else that's going to really concern the defense. And Murray night to night is just like not that guy right now. And so, yeah, that feels like a threshold question for me, that's a play better button kind of thing too. I guess like, can he just not be bad sometimes? Like I don't know. Maybe the injuries have made him a different player.
When you look at his career, and he's been good by his standards, certainly in December, when you look at, it's funny when you look at his career splits about how he progressively just gets better as the year goes on, which is, I know he's dealt with injuries, but I also don't like, even in the healthy seasons, I'm always like, are you just not prepared coming into the season? Then my question to you is why?
That's the thing. You do hear that he's coming out of shape a couple times, which is like, haven't we all seen the reels of his dad, like drilling him like crazy with like workouts and stuff since he was a kid? I don't know if you've ever, I feel like every Jamal Murray national TV game we get something. It's like,
I remember the initial reporting, like that story at ESPN like years ago about it. And I read it. I was like, is Child Protective Services?
Well, yeah, he's like doing wall sits with like hot cups of tea on his knees. So you don't stand up. Like, but I don't know. Maybe that's why he takes summers off. He's like, I've done enough of this.
Bonus question. Who is Calvin Booth going to sign this summer and inexplicably give a player option to?
Let's see. It's got to be a good one. It's going
to be Drew Eubanks, isn't it? Like, who's the backup big?
Such a good answer. I was trying like, who is the Dario Saric, Reggie Jackson next in line? That's good. We'll go Drew Eubanks.
This next team is yours, and this is a fun team to claim, I think. The Houston Rockets.
Can they score? That's the defense is championship caliber. I think it's disruptive. It's not a smoke and mirrors thing. I think they can physically overwhelm a lot of good playoff offenses. Like, we've seen it enough. What we haven't seen is enough individual shot creation consistently from the guys you'd look for it from on this roster, which is Jalen Green and which is Fred VanVleet, and the Alperen Şengün, who's been integral to the defense being this good. Like, he is at least not hurting it and is often helping it, I think, which is real growth for him. But him as an offensive hub it's not good enough. Like, that just, we love that about him, that he can be an elbow facilitator, a guy who can dominate in the post and be super physical and pass out of there. The offense, the numbers just they're not good enough. They're 26th in half court offense. And they're doing a little bit of like the couple years ago Memphis thing where, yeah, their offensive efficiency overall looks good, but it's a shit ton of offensive rebounds and they run and they're really good in transition. And, the Grizzlies actually did well in the playoffs given that profile when that really described them. But like, it's not how you want to make your money in playoff scenarios when you're trying to contend. Like, you're going to need a half court offense. You're going to need individual shot creation or a system that gets you a bunch of good looks or more shooters to hit those looks. So this might be a, like, can they go get somebody question, but I kind of didn't go that way. So 26th in 3-point frequency, 28th in accuracy. Half court offense sucks. Like, if
21st in crunch time offense too.
If this defense like goes to waste, it'll be a real bummer because they can really just make life hell in ways a lot of other teams over the years have not been able to.
So it's funny because I have a backup question, which I thought that you might go with something like that. And the only note that I have to add is I know people have harped on Fred VanVleet, like, as the shot, like, oh, he's not doing what you need. It's like, that's never actually been what Fred VanVleet does.
He's way overstretched in that role.
Right. And you can see it in crunch time. I was actually surprised their crunch time offense was 21st. I thought that was impressive for them.
Right. It gums up. Nothing happens on offense.
You don't know, like, Jalen Green leads this team in unassisted points, and that's not okay because Jalen Green is not good enough to do that.
Yeah.
And the Memphis Grizzlies profile is great, but like, come playoff time, they have had their struggles. I know they've advanced in the past, and like really put up fights. I do want to ask you this question then, though. Do they is now the time to, like, they could go out and get somebody? They've been mentioned. They're the team that has assets. They're going to be mentioned. Jimmy Butler, De'Aaron Fox, LaMelo Ball. They've already been mentioned for two of those guys. I feel like I have a contrarian answer to this question, which is why I want to ask you, like, is now the time to do that? I'm not even saying it needs to be, well, I guess I am looking at it through the lens of a bigger name, but like, if you're the Rockets, you have the assets to do this. You're really good, by the way. Like, this isn't, and I think that's part of the confusion with the Rockets too, is they have one of the 5 best point differentials against top 10 point differential teams.
Yeah.
Like, this team has like picked up some big time victories. And so I understand the temptation to say, well, they can acquire someone who makes a meaningful difference, like call it a number 2 guy, and they don't need to give up any of their core players basically to do so because the salary matching they have and the picks that they have. Is now the time to do it?
Well, why isn't it? Why wouldn't it be the time? Because you don't know yet. Can some of the guys currently here develop into the types of players we need? Because they've got. It's been a story for a couple of years. Like, they're loaded with young prospects, right? Like, is it because you think? So the reason I answer with a question is, like, if it's Fox, like, I think you go do it because I think Fox addresses so much of what you need and doesn't really take anything off the table. You could even, like, it doesn't I get, you got to have salary going out, but like, you don't even need to think about like, oh, well, what do we do with VanVleet? Like, VanVleet can come off the bench and run second units if you want, if you don't want to play them together. Like, I wouldn't do it for anybody. Like, I don't, like, Butler doesn't do it for me.
That's a no. Yeah.
Levine doesn't do it for me. Ingram doesn't do it for me. So if it's Fox, feels like a different class of asset because of his youth, because of his, like, how good he is now and how long he can stay this good. But I'm curious to hear your rationale for why now isn't the time. I don't have a strong opinion on it, but my gut would be like, if you can get Fox, you should probably do it.
I do think I land there. I was trying to think of the players that would move, because my answer is no. I don't think now, if you're talking about the one I've advocated, can they use like the Jock Landale, Jay Sean Tate, Jeff Green, Steven, like any of those contracts to get more shooting in here? a Duncan Robinson type or a just like insert shooter there that might get rotation minutes. My reservation though is, for one, trading Alperen Şengün or more importantly Jalen Green. You can't do it right now, like because of the way that the poison pill works. Jalen Green is an example. He counts as $12.4 million in outgoing salary for Houston. And then he counts as $29.5 million in incoming money for another team. That's just too big of a gap to, like, you can do it, but it's too complicated midseason. And I think Jalen Green absolutely needs to go out in any deal that they're making that's larger, because taking on his deal at this point is probably going to be part of the appeal. Yeah. Like if you're the Rockets, like the other team taking on his deal. And so what are you going to do if you trade for a De'Aaron Fox? You're going to then try and find a taker for Jalen Green over the summer, in which case, what is that doing for you? So the timing feels off with, I don't want to, yes, you could use Fred VanVleet as a team option for salary matching. You have Dylan Brooks. I just mentioned all the expiring guys. You could step ladder your way there. You can do it, but I'm of the mind that you already have not too many guys, but like Reed Sheppard doesn't get consistent playing time. Mm-hmm. And so, or it doesn't get a ton of playing time. So why are you going to even complicate the pecking order more to where if you get, let's use De'Aaron Fox as an example, who I want to be clear, our colleague Eric Pincus at Bleacher Report, by the way, came up with a trade that would get Houston De'Aaron Fox without costing them any of their Phoenix Suns picks. Reed Sheppard goes out, Amen Thompson stays. I'd probably, push comes to shove, I do something like that. But at the same time, like, if you get a De'Aaron Fox or someone else, like, you're probably hurting Jalen Green's trade value down the line because his role is going to get smaller. So you become better now, but I don't think it optimizes your roster moving forward. And honestly, I think the bigger thing for me is I want more information on this team. There's no move. There's no can't miss move that won't be available to you over the offseason. And when it becomes easier to use Jalen Green specifically as part of that, the salary matching going out. And then also it kind of leaves open the possibility, everything we're just describing, there's a chance that Reed Sheppard can do it. And why not give him the opportunity before you go that route? And look, he's probably not going to get that opportunity this season. That does lead me to my final concern here. How often do these midseason trades result in just smooth sailing? And I keep coming back to the Timberwolves trading for Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo, where it seems like some things are starting to be figured out now, almost halfway through the season. You're not going to have that kind of time after the trade deadline. Like, so I would just rather, when you're dealing with so many youngsters, do I believe that the stuff we think they need on offense is already on the roster? I think it could be Reed Sheppard. I don't think he's ever going to have that opportunity, at least this season. So the answer is probably no, but I don't think there's going to be a big enough trade-off to where you're going to get the boost that you need immediately that would convince me to, well, I'm going to compromise getting more information on the players I have in place just so I can be slightly more appealing in the play. Because this team is their vitals. They're a title contender. They're not winning the title this year. Right. Like De'Aaron Fox is not pushing them to a title. And so if I'm the Rockets, I mean this as a compliment. Some fans will probably take it as an insult. I'm just waiting. There's, again, if it's Fox or LaMelo Ball is kind of the other name I'm considering it, and you could talk me into it. I just don't see as much value in the Rockets making the consolidation trade mid-season as I think some other people do.
Yeah, I really, the idea of it being a mistake to sort of acquire players at the cost of or over the top of your young guys that you think are going to develop. Sheppard was one. We haven't even talked about really Cam Whitmore, who knows, but like if Cam Whitmore becomes a really good NBA player, he'll probably be the type of player that they would be going out to, like the guy who just scores in bunches and can be an offense by himself. Like, not saying that's going to happen, but if things go as well as they can for Whitmore, that's who I see him being, is like, oh, we need that guy. He can get us 26 a game, moderate efficiency, he can go get his own shot, all that stuff. The risk in that, and I think the most compelling part of the argument is what you said about just the timing of it and like the poison pill stuff. And like, it's just, yeah, you're right. Like midseason is not the time to do it. I think I agree with that now that you've talked me through it. The risk of like being concerned about bringing in someone over the top of Sheppard or whatever, who's just like not going to give them the opportunity, is that like Sheppard's value or Whitmore's value is actually going to go down. Because if we go through another year of this, the mystery box stuff is washed off a little bit. And now it's like, you know, I'm trying to think of an example of someone who you could have traded for a lot. I'm just thinking about a bunch of
Well,
Warriors.
think about this is on a smaller scale, but think about what happened with the Knicks and Obi Toppin.
Sure. Yeah.
To how much his trade value degraded year over year, and they ended up moving him for second round compensation.
Yeah. Brandon Pajemski right now. Like, oh, we can't trade him. And then he has a horrible start to the season. And it's like, well, his value is lower. Like, because he got the opportunity and then he didn't do anything with it. And so his value, like that could happen with Shepherd or Whitmore or whoever else. But I like the idea that they're like the Rockets are good. Like they're ahead of schedule again because we didn't see a leap like this. And they made one last year. So it's like you're a year plus ahead of schedule on any like rational development curve. So I think I agree with you that they don't need to do it. But if the question is the offense, like wherever it comes from, organic growth, trade, it isn't good enough, and it has to be better if they're going to contend like for real.
And by the way, the other thing too is just title windows are so fleeting now that you don't necessarily want to start the clock sooner than you have to. And your point about some players not being worth as much this summer, I totally get. But maybe internally, if you acquire De'Aaron Fox, you're not expecting a championship this year. But like the entire interpretation or view of your team shifts as soon as you most people don't consider like, oh, this is going to take a while to figure out. Like, they don't fucking care. Like if you make that, and to be fair, if you're going to make a move that costs you multiple firsts and maybe a prospect, like a blue chip prospect or two, that pressure's it's innate and it's probably also fair. I'm probably again, like how many teams have been able to kind of, I'm not saying pearl clutch all of this, but aside from Boston and Oklahoma City, and like Boston has undergone a lot of different iterations, it's just like you don't see these title windows opening for very long. And so I'm not going to start the clock sooner than I have to. If it was a matter of like Jalen Green would be a good example. Should you have extended him? Like that could have ended up being a miss for them. But like if it was a matter of, oh, this is Reed Shepherd in year 2, but it's not. It's Reed Shepherd in year 1. And so like his trade value is not, and like I don't think Jabari, maybe his trade value is a little bit because he's coming up on an extension eligibility and he's been uneven on offense this year. But I don't look at any of these players, even Cam Whitmore. I think after year 2, you still retain that mystery box appeal.
Probably so. Yeah, I think that's right.
Oh man, this team, the Memphis Grizzlies, are they my team or are they?
Yeah,
I think
tell me what your question about the Grizzlies is.
I mean, can they stay healthy? But that's neither here nor the answer to that is no. John Moran is week to week as we record this, and they'll just be fine because they're the Grizzlies. My question to them is actually kind of similar to what it was for the Rockets.
A little bit, yeah.
I want to know if the offense is playoff proof here. And you mentioned that video already done by Ben Taylor of Thinking Basketball. Everyone should check it out on YouTube. Their offense is kind of like you watch it and it's bizarre in a good way. And look, the vitals, they're going to back that up. And like, forget about their overall offensive rating, which they're still in the top 5 as we record this. I believe they're 6th in points scored per possession. I think more importantly for them, they're 11th in first chance offense. However, they're still 18th in the half court because a lot of the stuff they do is going to be, it's prided on getting an offensive rebound or more importantly, getting out in transition. They're 20th in 3-point attempt rate. They are 12th in percentage, but I think you could argue that they're not taking enough of them. They're 16th in crunch time offense, which I was actually kind of surprised by. I was very curious, not curious because they were mentioned in the Dorian Finney-Smith sweepstakes, but the 2 players that were rumored to be going out, John Conchar and Luke Kennard, are like in theory, some of their best, like higher volume 3-point shooters. And so it was, well, what are we kind of doing here? Because they don't have a single, aside from Desmond Bane, who's been all over the place this year himself, they don't have like an off the bounce 3-point threat. And they're one of the worst pull-up jump shooting teams in the league. I just question, I guess it is in a bad way. Like, do they need to get a higher end? I don't even think it needs to be a shot creator because you have Jaren Jackson Jr., you have Desmond Bane, you have Ja, you have just all these guys who could handle the ball too. But like to me, I think they need to get like a higher end floor spacer in here for this offense to really be postseason proof, because I did dig into some past like regular season versus postseason. For the most part, you're going to see transition frequency drop in the playoffs. And it's going to happen, I would argue, a lot of the time after those live rebounds. Like teams are just going to be, you're playing better teams for one, but teams are going to be more locked in on getting back. And so I view that as a fragile part of Memphis's offense.
Yes.
And I would just wonder, I'm not like, I don't think Dorian Finney-Smith was the answer. I think he was a good fit for the team, but I kind of think that they're not thinking, if that's the guy they circled as that's who we want, I don't think they're thinking properly about what they need to be upgrading ahead of the trade deadline.
Yeah, I think that's all fair. We're pretty group thinky on this one. My question was, can Memphis prove its offense is not a gimmick? Which is basically the same thing as like, is this playoff viable? I have some numbers though, because like this is my new thing I'm most fascinated by, because it arises at a time where all the criticism of, oh, the offenses are all the same is really out there. And so I'm really going to make it a point over the next month to just watch as many Grizzlies games as I can. Cause like what they are doing is fundamentally different than any other team. Like you don't want to overstate it. Like it's not a revolution because who knows if it's going to work, one, but it is like a legitimate shift in how offense is played. So like they're last in pick and roll ball handler and roll man frequency. So like the percentage of their plays that involve either of the, like it's a pick and roll league. It's been that way for 20 years. They're last by a ton in frequency. They're tied for last in shots taken off screens. They're last in handoffs. So they just don't do the pet actions that have defined NBA offense. They're number one in transition frequency, number one in spot ups. That's kind of the spot ups, I think, are the more interesting part of it, because transition is just like kind of a want to, as opposed to the spot ups is like, no, we are creating those shots through our offense. Number one in drives per game, and one of the highest pass percentages in the league on drives. So it's a little OKC, like drive, kick, and score at some point in that process. But it's like the numbers are just beyond extreme for how they play. And like, if you watch it, that Taylor video is amazing. Like they spread the floor, somebody drives, the whole rest of the team like shifts in concert, like in a like clockwise, counterclockwise. They all just move to space. I've never really seen an offense like this, let alone at the NBA level. So like,
neither is Draymond Green. Remember,
neither is Draymond. Yeah. Like, I hope it works, because this is potentially really exciting. We're getting far afield because I'm just like really interested in this. But when's the last time you had a team playing offense unlike anyone else? Like, do we have to go to when the Warriors started shooting a bunch of threes, or like the Rockets did the heliocentric Harden thing? Like, it doesn't happen that often. It's like an every 5 to 7 years thing. And if you're just ditching the pick and roll and like not setting screens anymore, like, it's been 50 years since a team thought that was a good idea. So I don't know. It's interesting. Who knows if it's going to work in the playoffs, though? That's really the question at the bottom of it.
And it's a weird question to have about I guess I'll loop it into two teams, because just top six is a weird way to cut up. Like, them and the Thunder are the only two teams in the top 7 of both offense and defense right now. And for so long, Memphis was the only team in the top 5 of both. And I know that's regular season is different than the playoffs, and they have a lot of depth. It's just funny how we're questioning whether what is maybe one of the 7 most efficient offenses in basketball overall can hold up in the playoffs. Right. And we tend to view depth as not, we don't ding teams for it, but we just write it off in the playoffs as, well, like, you kind of want to shorten your rotations to 7 or 8 guys when it matters most. And are they even built to do, like, who would be the 7 or 8 guys you just play in a playoff series on the Grizzlies? There's no way for them to shorten a rotation right now.
Right. Well, and you wouldn't want to, because like, you're going to take Jake LaRavia out of the rotation. He's having a career year. Like, can't do it. Santi Aldama can't do it. Like, there's all these guys. Yeah. That just, I don't know. That might be actually another question, is like, is it realistic for the Grizzlies to expect, 11 deep to be making, is Jay Huff going to get like 14 playoff minutes and be awesome? Because that's a night to night thing now. But like, is that,
we don't even like Gigi Jackson's not even in the equation right now. That's someone we expect to play.
Yeah.
They might have the rookie of the year, by the way, now too. Just the way Jalen Wells just might be rookie of the year.
Just stay healthy. He's going to get it.
This team is yours. And by the way, Memphis was not a team. They were a team that was an easy inclusion. The Milwaukee Bucks, though, Mr. Hughes. What are you thinking about them?
Through my hands here. All right, here we go. Just on my notepad here. So this was another hard one for me, because there's just like, depending on which section of the season you want to pull from.
They've had like 5 different seasons already.
Well, that's the thing. Like, what are we talking about? So I'll just rapid fire them, and maybe you can tell me which one you want to run with. Can Middleton be a true number 3, an elite number 3 on a playoff team like he's been? He was kind of a number 2 when they won it. You got Dame now, so like, the responsibilities on him are lower, but he's still just critical. Can he hold up physically? Will the bad transition defense matter? They get absolutely smoked off live rebounds, and that's just like, maybe that just means you're old. Maybe that means too many of your guys don't care. Like, does that change in the playoffs? Can you summon the effort it's going to take to get back when you miss a shot? Like, we minimize transition in postseason play, but like, if you're just not running back, like on makes or misses, like that's an issue. Are we worried about 3-point regression from guys like Prince, who's just had the best shooting season of his career, to a lesser extent, Middleton, AJ Green? Like, so I don't know. I think I named 4 or 5 things there. Do any of those map on to what you picked?
I think I ultimately landed on is the defense playoff caliber, because ever since they started the season 2-8, they have a top 8 offense and a top 9 defense. And so that's really good. And the offense, I know when you dig into certain lineups, the defense is outperforming the offense. With Dame and Giannis, their chemistry is better. No one gets Giannis the ball like Chris Middleton either. Their offense, to me, with their most important units, even if it's not okay right now, it's going, or it didn't start the season okay, and then it hasn't rebounded enough during this stretch. And then you have the Dame and Giannis injuries to boot with that. It's going to be fine. So I find myself more drawn to the defense, which it sounds like you do as well, obviously. Yeah. Aside from the transition, and by the way, during this stretch, they're still bottom 5 in transition defense off live rebounds. And so the number you mentioned is for the year, but even during their rebounding stretch, like that's where they've struggled. They still struggled with transition defense. Ball containment for them, it can be fine on some nights. It could be terrible on other nights. I think that they probably need to get more athletic. They're in the 14th percentile in defense against screens, 38th percentile in defense against pick and roll ball handlers. I just don't. And then this is the weirdest thing. Bobby Portis is the only one of their top 9 rotation players with an above average 3-point contest per 75 possessions. Wow. Their screen navigation among the bigs is not good. And I know part of that might be the way they defend, but even looking at Bobby Portis and Giannis, forget about how you use Brook Lopez. I think there are real spots to pick at with this defense when you get into a playoff setting. And then, as you mentioned, Chris Middleton, I think the question with him is, can he be healthy enough? Because when he's healthy, my answer would be, yeah, he's a number 3 or a number 2. That's fine. But does he give you another spot to pick at on defense if you're playing him? So I'm very interested to see the progression of this defense for the rest of the season. But once they get to the playoffs, I'm even more curious to see how that holds up, or where are they exposed, or where do they excel?
Yeah. It's funny that, like, kind of it to a larger extent than just thinking of past champions like Denver, we're asking, like, can this work in the playoffs about Milwaukee, even though like they've won it? It was a very different team. I think it's just, did you hesitate at all about even including the Bucks in our contender group?
I did not, because they play in the East, the injuries in Orlando, and it was just like, if you wanted to be really stingy, what are you just picking 3 teams
right
in the East?
Yeah.
So I felt compelled. I didn't like hesitate to include them in here. Did you?
I gave it like a split second. But then it's just like, they have Giannis and he's still playing great. Like, I'm not going to overthink this. Like, it didn't pass the shocked face test if they ended up in the conference finals.
No, I mean, you could probably talk me into being less shocked about the Bucks making the conference finals than the Knicks at this point.
Yeah, you're on record as just a Knicks unbeliever. So I expect that from you.
Who do we have next?
Oh, the Timberwolves. Do you want to go first, or is this me? I forget.
I think this one's me.
All right.
The question has to be, and I think there's probably 2, but they tie into each other. Does the offense have another gear, and can they find the optimal use or fit for Julius Randle? And recently they have, but for the season, they're 19th overall in offense, including 19th in the half court. They are 5th in 3-point attempt rate and 11th in 3-point percentage, even though Dante DiVincenzo hasn't shot the ball well. Jaden McDaniel's basically an offensive 0 at this point. Mike Conley's been all over the place. There's definitely not as much rim pressure, which I think is, and there's a decline in their free throw attempt rate. That, I think, more than anything, is a function of Anthony Edwards just spending more time putting up 3-pointers to help open up the floor. Yeah. They are still, I don't know if they're too dependent on Mike Conley, or they haven't optimized Mike Conley with a lot of their lineup usage. This is all coming at a time when the Julius Randle plus bench mob is, 1, killing it, but 2, it's being used in higher volume. And so when you have Randle, Naz Reid, Nah, and Dante DiVincenzo on the floor together, the Wolves are in the 99th percentile of offense. They're plus 15.8 per 100 overall. If you have Josh Minott as their 5th guy, their net rating's 41.1. If you throw Anthony Edwards into that equation, they're a plus 24.1. I think they have found a blueprint to making that work. And it's you talked about bringing Randall off the bench. They weren't playing Randall and Edwards separately enough for me to think that was necessarily going to benefit them.
Mhm.
And I also still wonder if you're putting Randall in this really like space heavy lineup, you are making life harder on Anthony Edwards, is I think what I'm fascinated by moving forward. And so you start to dig into it. Anthony Edwards actually has a higher effective field goal percentage by about 12 points when Julius Randle's on the court. And that comes down to me, even if Rudy Gobert's in there, like, okay, you could talk about the spacing, but like having that other self-creator on the floor who's not Mike Conley, and maybe now that changes a little bit because if you're not playing Mike Conley with Julius Randle and Anthony Edwards as much, so he's not as marginalized. I'm hopeful for that they've now found a path, especially if Dante DiVincenzo is just going to play like he has been. And he was always going to come around. I still think the starting lineup should be changed. I'm kind of at the point though, where I'd probably leave Randle in there and I put Dante DiVincenzo in for Mike Conley. And then your first sub can be Mike Conley for Julius Randle. And like, then you can still kind of get to the lineups you want, but it always feels like, and please correct me if you disagree, that there's going to be a fundamental trade-off with whatever kind of direction they choose, because I would be like Anthony Edwards seeing his efficiency kind of dip without Julius Randle. If you're going to give Julius Randle he's playing with 3 to 4 shooters at any given point, that just means there's going to be less 3 to 4 shooting lineups available for Ant to work with him.
My question is basically some version of that. It's just like, how do you deploy the players currently on this roster to get better offense from your starters and your bench? And it's like, it might be as simple. You could simplify it even further. Like, how do we get Anthony Edwards downhill once in a while? Like that, the 3-point stuff is amazing. Like I still am. I don't think it has been discussed, but it's like, we're overlooking like how incredible it is, the volume and accuracy of his 3-point shooting, which like, that was not a strength, like, certainly in his like pre-draft and coming up in development. And it's like, it's great. And yet I'm like unsatisfied. I don't like it. I think the best version of the Wolves certainly has plenty of threes from Edwards, but like, is him getting downhill into space. And so how do you do that? And my thought was like, well, get Randall out of there, get a spacer. But I think you make a good point of like, what I don't give Randall enough credit for is being someone that defenses like must pay attention to. Like, you can't ignore. Randall wants to score and is good at it. And so like a defense has to account for that. So there is a benefit to guys like Edwards playing with him, as you said. And I'll just admit to not crediting Randall enough for stuff like that. And so then it's like, well, okay, so let's put DiVincenzo in the first unit, but now you've got Conley off the floor. And you have to have Gobert out there, who ultimately, if you took Gobert out of the equation, then you really have the space you want. But like, you have to play Rudy Gobert. That's not negotiable. So like Conley not out there, who's has years and years of experience with Gobert in turning him into like a plausible offensive threat. Like, is Gobert going to just make it even harder offensively for everybody else to like get into space or get anything done? I don't know. There's just every like hole you plug, another one springs. That's kind of, it feels, holes in a dam is kind of the issue with the Wolves offense. I do still think there's a mix there that could work long-term sustainably, even if I still am not just going to love having Julius Randle on my team. I think there's ways to get it to a point where this defense can be among the best in the league and the offense can be just good enough. But I don't know. I haven't seen it yet. And like, they haven't tried drastic stuff. Maybe that's the next move, is you do try benching Conley or you do try benching Randall, but that's the side of the ball that stuff just has to get sorted out on.
So I think that's why benching Randall's probably the right answer. I just don't, it's not even optically, but you're worried about disengaging Randall now when he's starting.
I think you might lose him, right? You're worried you may lose him.
And it's not about, you might want to lose him over the offseason. We still don't know like the true motives of that. They could say like, oh, we were trying to balance out the roster. It feels like do they want Julius Randle to walk and just save all that money? We'll have to wait and see. But
Bold
that's
strategy.
why I would go. And if you make Conley the first sub, I think that would, and Rudy Gobert still on the court, I think that would maybe mitigate the offensive trade-off. But then you're still talking about like what, 3 to 4 minute stretch before you pull Randall or whatever. That You're right though. So it's the holes in the dam theory. It does feel, I know that they're on a better stretch of recording right now, but they haven't, like, it hasn't been easy sledding for them during their like mini streak at the moment. It does seem like they're onto something, or at least they kind of understand how to optimize Julius Randle. Now the trick is, how do you do that? Well, it doesn't come at the cost of everyone else, specifically Anthony Edwards. Just this, honestly, I was not expecting this, but Anthony Edwards with Randle on the court, 55.9 effective field goal percentage. With Julius Randle off the court, 48.6. And then that actually drops too, if you include Conley in those non-Julius Randle minutes, it drops to 46.9 with Conley and no Randle. And so I think there's something to, okay, it might be cool to put Edwards in lineups where it feels like he can get downhill more, but are those then going to be lineups where, because you know one defender is going to care about Julius Randle, are you seeing 3 to the ball or even 2 to the ball more when Ant does get going downhill? And that's, you phrased it perfectly with the holes in the dam theory. I can't do better than that.
Well, that's a good point to move on then after a compliment to me.
Our next team is actually your team. Fuck me. What's your biggest question for the New York Knicks? Is it when will Dan Valley come around on them?
Yeah, when is Dan going to just stop hating on this incredible contender? It is funny that I think higher on them than you. But so like, it's fairly straightforward. Your pick and roll defense in big minutes is going to involve Cat and it's going to involve Jalen Brunson. And so far, teams know that and are using it a lot. The Knicks face more pick and roll ball handler frequency than any other team. They're giving up 0.88 points per play, which is that's like a middling figure. But if you can get a steady diet of that, I think the trick, like it makes playoff offense like very simple for opposing offenses. If they know they can just get a decent look on a high volume of pick and roll ball handler plays. Roll men don't get the ball as often, but the Knicks are the worst defense in the league against the roll man on a points per play basis. So that is just my threshold concern, is how do the Knicks figure out a way to make the 1-5 pick and roll not just a no-brainer go-to against every good playoff team? Because that's going to lead to, unless you think Cat, and if he's playing center, that maybe that's part of how we answer this question. Unless you think Cat and Brunson are going to be able to handle that, you're going to have to pull in help off shooters. You're going to have smart playoff offenses getting corner 3. Like that's just the thing that has to be sorted out. I think because the offense is great. The defense has been better, and the Cat like rim protection numbers have normalized slightly, like to just bad instead of like unfathomable. But I don't know how you build a playoff defense if you're vulnerable against like the most basic thing every team wants to run.
I basically have the same question. I viewed it from the approach of, can we get out in front of, well, people are going to point to this and say, well, look at what's happening. And so you mentioned like they actually have the same pick and roll numbers written down. So they're middle of the pack in defending those. You have to look at the level of competition, number one. And also, by the way, though, it helps that Mikal Bridges is defending way better.
He's looked better on both. Rough night the other night, but like shooting wise, but he's had some, I mean, his Christmas game was insane. Like he's looked better in general. And so
the Knicks defense in the 61st percentile with Cat on the floor, and then the 55th with both him and Brunson. And so if you're going to be around league average with both of those guys on the court, that's the goal. Now, start to break it down by the level of opponent. Against bottom 10 offenses, they are 10th in points allowed per possession. And then, by the way, they're 15-0. I found that against bottom 10 offenses. So 15 of those games have come against really bad offenses. They've won every single one of them. That beat those teams. That's not an insult. They are 16th in points allowed per possession against middle 10 offenses. So 11-20. They are still dead last in points allowed per possession against top 10 offenses. And if you want to filter out the Celtics game to open the season,
Boston.
Well, guess where they rank? Filtering that out, because I did it.
Second to last?
26th. It's still bottom 5. And so that's not accounting for a huge portion of your schedule. But I would argue those are the teams you want to think about when you're building a playoff level defense. I also think they've gone at points to some, I don't know if it's dramatic or great lengths to insulate the Jalen Brunson Cat like pick and rolls. And it's come at the expense of other guys don't have a chance to recover onto shooters, or Jalen Brunson's not going to be able to get there. And to that effect, they're 27th in points allowed per spot up possession. That is really bad. And I think their challenge is, everyone's talking about how they need to make trades. And I would probably agree they need to get deeper, but the type of depth they need, they're in a weird spot because you're not going to replace any one of the core 5. What you need to do is get an extension of the perimeter players you have in place who aren't Jalen Brunson. So you're looking at Deuce McBride, Josh Hart, Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby. Can you get another one of not someone who's as good as those, but to extend the minutes where you can maybe defend the same way when Jalen Brunson and or Cat are both on the floor? And the goal should then be, okay, if you believe in your core lineup is going to be able to insulate yourself against the Cat and Brunson pick and roll. And by the way, I don't think that's a given. I think when you go up against top tier competition, all the questions you laid out are still going to apply. You need to find a way to extend that across all 48 minutes to, one, help you survive the regular season even better than you have so far. And again, they have like one of the 4 best records in the league. So they certainly belong here, even as a skeptic, but also just to give yourself optionality in the playoffs. And I actually like, this is a team that you could argue maybe they don't make a move, especially if you think Mitchell Robinson is going to be healthy. But I've now looked at this team and I've kind of vacillated on what I think they need. And I'd be open to them getting a different type of big, but they need like another combo wing, like who can play minutes in a playoff rotation. And I think that's the only type of acquisition that will make me feel better about their defense, because I don't like, they have some good evidence, but it's not deafening evidence to the contrary when you're looking at defensive concerns. And look, they're on a winning streak. It just hasn't come against the highest level of competition. And they're a really good team. I think it's yet to be seen whether they're a great team.
Yeah. I was just thinking like one thing you see sometimes when the 1-5 just can't contain pick and rolls is you just see a lot of aggressive. I should have looked up the numbers, how often they just trap the ball handler and get the ball swinging around, because you look at the personnel and you'd say like, I feel very good about Bridges and OG and Hart, like sprinting around to like cover up, the chain of events you trigger by trapping the ball handler with 2 guys, except like if they're all going to play 43 minutes and like 45 in the playoffs, I don't think you can play the sort of defense you would need to play on the backside to trap a lot against pick and rolls, right? Because like it's just so the amount of running and changing direction and just like the physical toll of that, I don't think that's realistic over like the minutes load that these guys play. So while they have the guys to do it, I wonder if like that's just not going to be something they can actually go to if they needed to against playoff teams. Just interesting setup, because personnel makes sense, but the minute totals and just like how hard these guys have to play, otherwise you just may not have enough juice to get that done.
I think we haven't talked about it, but you only need, when you're in their case, I think you need to be a league average defense come playoff time, because your offense is just so good.
Yeah, right.
They're second in points scored per possession right now. And between them, Boston and Cleveland, any one of those teams are going to end up in first. And so that gives them something of a margin for error, but it's not like you can't be like, we'll have to see as their schedule gets a little bit harder moving forward. You can't be like against top 10 offenses on the season. If they still hover around the bottom 5 in points allowed per possession all season, again, we're not even halfway through. That's a red flag.
Yeah, for sure.
Who we got next?
This is the Thunder, Dan. I forget who's going first. I bet we're going to have a similar question though. Is it me?
It's me. And
right.
I couldn't think of, we've talked so much about the trade deadline. I didn't want to make it a trade deadline question, but I have to. I think the only thing you'll point to is just, they're 28th in defensive rebounding. They don't have Chet Holmgren, so they're only like, they barely had a big at all this season. So I can't. Do they have the personnel to do that? Yeah, when Chet's healthy, they'll improve upon it. They foul a bunch. When you're so aggressive and forcing turnovers, and also have one of the best defenses of all time, you foul as much as you want, as far as I'm concerned. It comes back to the offense, and you don't have to look at it through the trade deadline, but do they have enough contingencies to? And I think it boils down to 2 separate things. Do you have enough shooting? And the answer to me right now is no. Even if you expect Alex Caruso to get better, but do you have enough high volume 3-point shooting? Or do you have enough secondary creation aside from Shai Gilgeous-Alexander? And I want to say yes, especially because we haven't seen Chet and J-Dub play a bunch without Shai this season, because Chet has not played really like at all this season. But man, when you start to dig into the numbers without Shai, the Thunder are in the 5th percentile of offensive efficiency when he's not on the court. They're in the 44th percentile of half court without him, though. They're in the 20th percent. This is with J-Dub on the floor, excuse me. When you have J-Dub and Hartenstein, you're in the 20th percentile without Shai. You are 71st in the half court, though. And then for the numbers that we've seen, Chet and J-Dub with no Shai, that was the 28th percentile of offense. That was only 119 possession sample size. I am actually asking you this question. Do you think that this team can improve upon that state by doing nothing, to where you might think that some of their guys are going to shoot more or better, looking at Alex Caruso as one? Because they're 21st they're 21st in 3-point percentage, which is just not great. And so the rate at which they get them up, they're 13th in 3-point attempt rate. That's kind of nondescript too. It's fine, but if you're not going to be one of the best 3-point shooting teams in the league. It's, well, do you need more of them, especially when you're considered a 5-out type of squad? But do they need to go out and actively decide, hey, we need to trade for like another higher, like a wing shooter with size? Because part of the reason you might say, why doesn't Aaron Wiggins or Isaiah Joe play more than they do? It might be a size thing.
Yeah, they're small.
Or do they need to go out and get, then this can be a sized but damned thing. Do they need another shot creator who kind of cracks the rotation?
So I think right now, I think that's a pretty clear concern. Right now, I think, and you may not get the luxury to do this, but I would like to just see, once Chet is back and we have Hartenstein like more fully integrated into the offense, because Hartenstein is a helpful offensive player. Like, he's a good passer. He's sort of, by the way, like, they defensive rebound fine when he's on the floor, like problem solved as long as he's on the floor. And that will lead into my question, which is a little different than yours. But I would be inclined to try to see if we've got lineup combinations involve non-Shea that involve J-Dub and Chet, and hopefully you get some better, maybe Hartenstein, and you get some guys like Caruso's the example for sure, to just make more shots. Can that get you to like passable? And then in a playoff setting, you can be passable for 8 minutes. That Shea is not on the floor. Like, I'd like to see if they could put a run together where things look better offensively with all their guys, and you price in and hope for better supplementary shooting before I go make a move. But I think like it is possible that they just do need to do something. I would wait, but like, I don't know, how much of a look are you going to get at that sort of thing based on Chet's return timeline? Like, the deadline may come and go before you have any idea. So that's a tough call. I understand how it was hard to resist the trade deadline angle for this team specifically. For me, because we talked about it a little bit and never really got too deep into it. Just who's going to close? I think it's just an interesting question, because the non-negotiables are J-Dub and SGA. You would assume Chet. Hartenstein, I think, because of the defensive rebounding, like, I kind of want Hartenstein out there. And it's not like you get Chet to space, so you only have one non-spacer, and that non-spacer can pass and make good decisions. And then after, like, is it Caruso? Is it Dort? Is it Wallace? Might it be Wiggins some nights? Like, I don't know. I think it's going to be a really interesting question, because one, they do have depth for like that last spot, maybe, depending on what you need from it. And obviously we know that a closing lineup is not something you lock in for the full season or the full postseason, but I think it's just an interesting way to think about this team is to look at like, well, who do you actually want out there, all things being equal, to finish a game? Because for a team this good, it's weird that we're not 100% sure.
Yeah. It's almost like, to simplify it even further, would be, are they going to close with one or two bigs more often than not?
Yeah.
Is kind of the question. And I would have argued it would have been one big. I did argue before the season started, but that was like pre-Alex Caruso shooting sub 28% from three. Mm-hmm. And so I think that makes things interesting. Circling back to the trade deadline thing, which I like might tie into, like, do you need to trade for someone who's part of your closing lineup then? Oh. I would advocate towards them standing pat. I want to see what this all looks like when Chet comes back. At the same time, and maybe I'm just being kind of an asshole here, if you're not going to figure out a way to make Aaron Wiggins a bigger part of your rotation, then if you think you would play Cam Johnson more because he's bigger, like an Aaron Wiggins plus empty salary for Cam Johnson, not empty salary, but Ousmane Dieng, or just another salary that comes close or will work mathematically, that might be something to look at then, because I think Aaron Wiggins is a really good basketball player. I know he's not shooting the three ball well this month, and I don't think he's necessarily the answer to more shot creation, but like is kind of someone who toes the line between guard and wing and is pretty plug and play at both ends of the floor. Like, that's what I want to see more of. And so if you're not going to, like, if you can't get to 25 minutes a game for him, or you don't think he's capable of having, like, maintaining a type of impact across that many minutes, that's when I might more seriously consider, well, should we just go out and do something on the trade market?
Yeah. My ears perked up at Cam Johnson instead of Wiggins. I love Wiggins too, but like that feels like that would change things in a positive way for them.
But it's like, does it? Because like, can you play Cam Johnson with the two bigs? I guess you can. I like everyone's fit on OKC probably.
Right, that's the thing.
He's not giving you, you've then now decided you're investing, and it's not obliterating your roster, but if you go after Cam Johnson, that's not a shot creation move. That's size and 3-point shooting is what you've decided.
And I do think though that if you have Wiggins has had great 3-point shooting years, but like, I think one of the things that I come back to a lot is like, man, the Thunder sure get a lot of wide open threes for Lou Dort. And even though he's like a 39% shooter, I just never, I feel like that's a defensive win if you force the Thunder to have Dort take a shot. So like, if you have Cam Johnson out there, you treat him very differently as a defense. And maybe that opens things up for what you really want to do, which is get Shea downhill and get Jade up downhill. Because you're just going to treat Cam Johnson differently as a defense than even Wiggins, for example, who's had some great drive, just a good offensive player, full stop. But yeah, I don't know. I like the size. I don't know why. I don't know if you're going to have a guy out there just to shoot, I'd prefer he be bigger than smaller. I don't know.
Isaiah Joe, just because he's more of a motion shooter than an Aaron Wiggins or even a Cam Johnson, if he was like bigger and stronger, is like, what would be what's a bigger, stronger Isaiah Joe?
Kind of like Michael Porter Jr., like just a big guy that's out there to run around and shoot.
He makes so much money. Now you're talking about, are we trading Wiggins and Joe and Joe?
No.
What about, would this be a Duncan Robinson team? Or is that not really do it? He's
never going to close.
Kind of a stretch.
Yeah, he's never going to close for you. That's the thing, is like, we're at such a high level right now. We're looking for someone on the trade market, which is barren, who could close for the best team in the league.
So I think they should stand pat for the most part. The Aaron Wiggins thing is interesting. Who would be your coaching this team? What would be your go-to for fuck matchups for a second? What's your go-to closing lineup?
I think I have SGA, J-Dub, Hartenstein, and Chet. And ideally I would want Caruso which is over Dort. And it's weird because I'm like making a defensive decision and I'm passing over Lou Dort. I think Caruso, unless you have a really big wing on the other side, Caruso just causes so much trouble. And if he can make shots, and he's a better decision maker than Dort. He's just a better all around player, probably.
So I would close with both Dort and Caruso over the dual bigs for the most part. But if it came down to Caruso or Dort, I do think I'm picking Dort, not only because of the bigger wing defense, but there is value. Even if you don't trust Dort as a shooter, there's value in the volume. And that dude gets them up. And I think he still doesn't receive enough credit for how long did it take Shea to get up 3-pointers? But till this year, basically. And Caruso is still far too passive in that regard. I'd be interested in could Case and Wallace, a Case and Wallace. And that's why I like the one big look more, because it allows you to get just a little bit more funky on the perimeter with who you play.
I just like Hartenstein so much. I love, and he the rebounding is going to be a problem unless he's playing. And I would hate to get through a playoff run where the Thunder get eliminated because they couldn't rebound, and it's because they didn't play Hartenstein enough. That's hard to imagine we get there, but I could see it.
I am a little upset that he hasn't dabbled in 3-point shooting. I thought maybe they'd have him space out to the corners a little bit, but hey, he's averaging half attempts per game in December. So let's hold out hope there. This next team is for you, Grant. What up with the Orlando Magic?
Do you want to? I mean, it's kind of do we even need to pretend like we don't have the same thing here? It's just it's Houston East to some extent. It's just how are you going to score enough to make this defense, to honor this defense? Let's put it in those terms, to make it worth it.
To honor this defense. How
good you are defensively. How do you not dishonor the defense by scoring enough? 25th in offensive rating. They turn it over a lot. That's been the case for the last 4+ years, not necessarily the 25th rank, although they've been bad. The turnover thing is strange. So just for some perspective, with Franz on the floor, 61st percentile offensive rating, that would honor the defense. That's good enough.
We have the same notes.
Do we? Okay, let's see how many more we have. Do you want to guess what the next percentile ranking I'm going to give is?
What they were with Franz and Paolo last year. Am I right?
Yeah. Actually, wait. So they're 72nd with Franz and Paolo this year, even though that's a vanishingly small sample.
Yeah.
But they were in the 26th percentile last year with Franz and Paolo on the floor together. Should we just stop and just think thoughts to each other instead of looking things up and talking?
Well, subscribers, will they at this point, are they thinking, did they know what was coming? Let us know in the comments or our Discord.
Yeah. Let's see. Those are all the stats I have. Did you have more stats? You usually do have more stats than me.
I did dig a little bit further. So when you look last year with Franz and no Paolo, they were in the 94th percentile of offense and 90th in half court. When Paolo played without Franz last year, 61st overall and then 49th in the half court. they were 27th in the half court with both Paolo and Franz. And what my question would be for them is it's this along the same lines, but are you going to be healthy enough for the offense to honor the defense? Because we like the timeline for Franz is just unknown. Paolo's missed so much time this year. And now Mo Wagner's out for the season, and he's pretty important to some of their, like, what he can do as a big, not in like heavy minutes and volume, but holy shit.
So he's a good offensive player for them, which they don't have a lot of.
And I mean, his usage versus true shooting for a big is ridiculous. Like, I know he wasn't doing super complex stuff, but still. And so that leads me into, there are two like different ways I'm looking at this. If you think that you're going to have both Paolo and Franz when it matters most, like Franz specifically is going to be healthy in time, I feel like you're almost obligated to then, well, let's look on the trade market for more shooting. Mm-hmm. But I also wonder, so the Paolo without Franz stuff, because the Magic are finally playing faster this year. Part of that has been, well, when you don't have Franz or Paolo, like you need to paper over the lack of skill by playing faster, but they've always kind of done a better job upping their transition stuff when it's just Franz. I think Paolo inherently does slow things down. I don't think it needs to be that way for this team. And so just so we're not kind of repeating the same thing, is my actual question would be, can they continue to kind of kick it up a gear, like increase the urgency with which they operate? And I would say specifically after live rebounds, because Paolo's not the type of guy where it's all right if you're going to inbound the ball. Like, I don't expect him to get up that way on a dead ball. Mm-hmm. But I think that there could be value. And if you're not going to change the personnel, which is probably fair given the number and the scope of injuries you're dealing with right now, if you're not going to go out and get an Anthony Simons or whoever, can you continue to play faster during not just the Paolo and no Franz minutes, but the Paolo and Franz minutes? And I think that might be the best way to, aside from growth from both of them, which, by the way, Paolo, I know a lot of people harp on his efficiency. He was annihilatory in the playoffs last year. Like, that was, if you had any doubts about Paolo, that should have been, even though they lost, that was the series that, oh, okay. And so it's the same thing, but I'm just wondering, can they also continue to play at a faster clip when they have a Paolo on the floor, whether it's with or without Franz?
Yeah, you would think that'd be an easy solve, like, especially since half the time the guy getting the defensive rebound is going to be one of your big forwards who's going to be able to push the ball up. So yeah, I'm with that. I'm just surprised to say that based on the numbers you cited from last year that they need to trade one of Franz or Paolo, because clearly they're better with just one on the floor than both. Well, I didn't think you were going to go that way.
Yeah, that's clearly what this is.
Those numbers are clearly against second units, because that's the only time you have one or the other off the floor.
Would you, if you're this team though, how are you approaching it's not just the trade deadline, but the rest of this? Like, if there's an opportunity to go out, I'm just going to use Anthony Simons as an example, that type of player who's going to improve probably some of your on-ball facilitation and like playmaking options, but just in general, your offense to open it up more. Like, or is it just, are you not doing, I mean, the Magic, let's be honest, they're not doing it regardless of, like, everyone could be healthy and they're not going to do it. But when you're looking at, okay, like the injuries that they've just withstood, is it kind of just, no, we're not going to do this?
I think the reason might be that, like, Simons isn't good enough to make the kind of difference I would want on a team that now, after some of the things that have developed this year, that they should be looking at. Like, because the defense is elite. That's just going to be what it is. And you can peel off some of that to get a guy like Simons if you want to. But I think the sort of validation that this defense is going to be great, paired with how good Paolo looked in his tiny season opening stretch, paired with how good Franz looked, it's now like, oh, we need like a third best guy on a finals team. Like, and that ain't Simons. Like, I'm not saying Suggs is great. We all love Suggs, but I think like Orlando has enough stuff going for it to where you need to aim higher than Simons. I think, like, Simons makes sense. He addresses the issue, but I think this team is good enough and young enough and has enough like profile aspects that I like, to where you need to keep the powder dry for someone like, for a Fox, for example. Like, you need like an all NBA or like high all-star guy.
So we want them to get shooting, and we're picking the.
Well, he's going to run the off. Like, I don't care if it's shooting. Get me a really good offensive player.
I'm actually higher on his shooting than most. The percentages aren't there, but like, he can get to the step back. I was just being an asshole.
Yeah. No, right. That is a fair point though. Like, the cheap way to do it is just get a guy who's going to make 40% of his threes on decent volume.
I guess because this season, if De'Aaron Fox becomes available, I think you have to, as the Magic, or same thing with LaMelo Ball, is maybe the best idea then. Like you split the baby, which that's, by the way, that's a horrible saying. And I've said it in 2 consecutive podcasts. Yeah. Who came up with that? But
that we can credit that one to the Bible. Thanks, Bible. Great imagery.
Right. Look at me spitting Bible verses out here. I didn't even know it. But you kind of split the difference here and said, like, here's a trade that I would find fascinating. I don't know if the money lines up perfectly, but the framework is there. Jonathan Isaac for Kevin Huerter.
I like Isaac too much.
Kevin Huerter can play more than 10 minutes a game.
That's true. Yeah, and right. I just said you can peel off some of the defense. You're peeling off a lot of the defense if you in short stints.
I think you would still be fine because Trevelyan Queen exists. By the way, like you're set. But my whole thing would be you're not giving up any first round equity, and you are improving the offense. And I guess if you're arguing the defense will be torpedoed, like if you don't think what they have in place, I mean, Franz will eventually come back.
Yeah.
So I think they have enough there with Suggs and KCP and Anthony Black. And even Gogo Batadze. You wouldn't consider it though. Yeah, that's just a hard no for you.
I think about it. As I was doubling back on it, it's like for what you need from the role, like how much worse is Kevin Huerter than Simons? We'd both say Simons is a better offensive player, but you're talking about someone that you're not going to make him.
If you want the upgrade to come with someone who's going to run the offense, that's not Simons' strength. Right. And so get someone who does the more of the Simons off-ball stuff.
Yeah. I would love Isaac on the Kings, by the way. Like that would be very.
By the way, we could find another. Would that be with the contracts? By the way, that Orlando has, they could find another way to get Kevin Huerter if they wanted to. But if you're not giving up a first round pick, is that the type of trade that you would consider making this season as this team? Like it's not the home run trade.
Yeah, I mean, I would consider it. I'm in a place now though where I think Orlando's got to make one big move, and like capital B. Big and then I think with the 2 forwards and with Suggs looking like a maybe Derek White minus some offense guy, like in the pipeline for a Derek White type career, like I think you got to get somebody that's really going to move the needle because they're good enough to justify that. Does that make sense? Like I think the small time stuff isn't what I'm focused on.
Which I think is fair, but like what if the 2 things for me is what if the big time stuff isn't available, and then 2. Even if it is this the season to do it when you might not, I mean, you probably will have your 2 best players available for the playoffs, hopefully, but what if you don't?
No, that's the thing. I'm talking about a player that you're like, he's a cornerstone for the next 4 or 5 years. Like it's not, we keep using this as an example, but it's like not Jimmy Butler, not the guy that's like probably going to walk has a shelf life that's rapidly expiring. Like not that kind of.
Yeah. There's no, aside from De'Aaron Fox, there's no player who profiles as he might be available. Like we've mentioned LaMelo Ball, but like he's not someone who's considered available. Like, is there another player that might fit that bill?
No, there'll be a next wave though. Like Fox is now like, oh, we weren't talking about him at all, and now there'll be another Fox or another whatever. Like it'll happen. But yeah, I'm talking about the player I'm talking about for them is not available.
Who we got next?
This is Philly. Do I lead? Oh, geez. Oh no, wait. Did I go first? Because you guessed all my stats.
Yeah. So this is me. My thing with Philly, the health stuff, obviously, but I think the question is the offense ever going to be? I've been actually very impressed with the defense. Even you look at the injuries that they've dealt with to start the year, but they're still bottom 5 in offense. They're 24th in both rim and 3-point percentage. They are a plus 6.9 with the big 3 on the court, but even the big 3 lineups are in the 21st percentile of offense. When you start to kind of dig into like splitting up the big 3, the numbers are all over the place.
Yeah.
PG and Maxey with no Embiid, plus 5.7, 80th in offense. When it's PG and Embiid with no Maxey, minus 17.2, 0th percentile for offense. Maxey and Embiid without Paul George, plus 1.1. They're about league average offense. I think the big thing with this team is and this is just him as an example, Paul George shooting sub 30%, Grant, on semi-open and wide open threes. Mm-hmm. So any 3 where a defender is at least 4 feet away, that is not good. I assume that number is going to come up, but you look at the rest of this roster, and I find myself asking, especially given the Jared McCain injury now, is there enough shooting for them to consistently run a functional offense? So even if you believe that Paul George overall is at like 34%, that should come up. Kelly Oubre Jr. at 34%, you can't guarantee me that's going to come up. Joel Embiid, by the way, is at 40% for the year. That might go down Gershon Yabusele, 31.7%. Honestly, that could go down. Eric Gordon, all right, doesn't play a ton. What is he playing? Like 3 games in the past? Oh, this is only for the month of December. I'm looking at that. That's why. My point being, though, with this team, Grant, is there enough shooting for them to consistently run a good offense? And then if there's not, have you suddenly found yourself way too dependent on Tyrese Maxey going nuclear as he has been?
Yeah, I think that's a fair concern. I would. They're 5-1 over the last couple of weeks, and they're like 11th in offense and 13th in defense, which is like that's more. I tend to believe a little bit more in that, and I tend to be less persuaded by the like any of the lineup combo numbers at this point, because like I just don't have enough information there. The shooting is interesting. I think Paul George is going to shoot it better. Like he just has to, and I would say it's a concern because, you know, we've said in several instances during this pod, like you really don't want someone, maybe just I say this all the time, you really just can't have someone out there, if you're talking about a contender, that the defense can like beg you to have him shoot. And so like me saying, I think between George and Maxey and an offense that runs through Embiid in a perfect world, like that's enough. But then, you know, if Martin's going to get left, or if Oubre is going to get left, or whatever, Kyle Lowry, like, then maybe that is an issue. That's a high level issue. I imagine the Sixers really hope they have to contend with that, because it'll mean that they got enough out of their core 3 guys to get there. I just went with the health thing. I wasn't going to go past that. Like, how is Embiid even capable of being like a consistent, you know, all-star level player for like the rest of the season and playoffs? Like, he's had a couple great games, but you can't watch the guy play and say he's the same player. It's not there. And I don't know if we're getting back to that.
Do you think that they're more, I mean, are they more innocuous? Like if Maxey and Paul George are going to win the minutes they're on the court without Joel Embiid, you're not going to win a title without Joel Embiid.
No.
But like, are you more inoculated against him not being top 5 player in the league, Joel Embiid now? It seems
sure,
like
that
they might be.
That for sure helps. Who did they play? They played somebody bad last night or the night before, and it was like not in doubt. And Embiid played 36 minutes. And I was just like, what are we doing? Like, get the guy out at halftime if you have to. Right. It helps if those two can win their minutes, which like they could, because you get enough supporting cast around them. That's a good one too, again, on most nights. But you said the quiet part loud. It's like none of this matters if Embiid isn't the best player throughout an entire playoff run. Like that will have to be what happens, independent of anything else, for them to actually contend.
Yeah, so just to get the numbers right, even Maxey's below 35% from 3 for the year. That will come up, and he's been a thermonuclear lately.
Yeah.
Paul George, 31.5% for the year. That'll come up. Jaron McCain, 38.3%. They're going to miss that plus the volume.
That's going to stay
at 28. What'd you say?
That's going to stay the same.
Yeah. Oubre's at 28.7% and 34% in December. Embiid's been at 30.2%. That should come up, and it has come up in December. Gershon Yabusele at 39+% is already starting to come down. If I told you that Caleb Martin was shooting 37.5% from 3 for the season, that would surprise you, right?
That would seem high to me.
Yeah, there's no volume there really, but that's what he's shooting for the season. So is that like, I know it's the health thing, but like, what does this team need at the trade deadline then when you're looking at it? I think we focused on like a 4 or a combo wing for the most part who can get shots up, but is there any merit to the thought of, well, if Paul George kind of isn't that on ball killer, do you need now, especially with Jared McCain out, like, does it need to be a guard who's not Eric Gordon or Kyle Lowry?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, maybe that is it. Because we saw Maxey, I mean, he got hurt, but like it can't just be Maxey, right? Like he's great, an awesome offensive player, but that's just too much for him. And if George isn't that guy and Embiid is you might need another guy to create shots. Like really,
like a guard with size. I don't even know who springs to mind necessarily there.
Yeah, I don't know.
It would be actually really good for this team, but they're not going to trade Norm Powell, who's probably going to win most improved player.
Yeah, I was going to say like Clarkson isn't good enough. Like, but Norm Powell is just like the best possible version of the.
What about? I assume he's gettable. We haven't heard he's available. Would a Bogdan Bogdanovic be along the lines?
Yeah, I like that because he could run. You could play him at the 1 with Maxey off too.
Or honestly, this might be one of the players who comes close to checking. Creation's a strong word, but just the way he's been playing, DeAndre Hunter.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, if you could get this version of DeAndre Hunter for the full run, like he's outplayed Paul George so far this year by a lot. Like Paul George, we love Paul George as a third guy. Imagine how much we love Paul George as a number 4 option. Amazing.
Number 5 if McCain comes back too.
Oh yeah, the ideal situation for Paul George.
Grant, that wraps up our contenders that we have is not even outright, but those are the singular contenders we were going to ask questions about. But we now have to get to the section of all the teams we left off. So no Lakers, no Phoenix Suns, no Golden State Warriors, no Sacramento Kings. And then that's pretty much like of the teams I think are the biggest exclusions, but there's also whether you think it's the Hawks, the Pacers, the Spurs, or the Clippers who've outperformed expectations and have yet to get Kawhi Leonard back. Is there, I don't know how you want to tackle this. We're not going to get into each individual team, but of the teams we mentioned, I'll throw Miami in there as well. Which team do you think is the closest to entering the title contender fold?
Well, here's what's weird is I was just sorting by just their differentials this year, and the team we've disrespected the most technically is the Clippers because they have the highest net rating of any team we didn't put in the contender class, which kind of hilarious.
And they maybe have a top 10 player coming back.
They have the most obvious, like, well, how does this team get better? I'll just bring a finals MVP back. Probably that's, going to be their best player if he's healthy at all. So I guess probably you should say the Clippers. I guess for me, that's not where my heart is though.
Well, because the question with the Clippers is, will Kawhi, because they're not going to be a contender without Kawhi. And so what will Kawhi look like upon return? And will he be on the court in the playoffs?
Right. But I'm just saying, like, of the teams we're discussing, the Clippers have that could happen pathway that doesn't involve making a huge trade. They're just going to trade nothing for a really great player.
However, what is actually more likely though? Because I would argue that, I'll use the Warriors or the Lakers as an example. I think it's more realistic that one of those teams make a big time acquisition just based off the track record now saying Kawhi Leonard will be Kawhi Leonard 1 and then 2 available in the playoffs for the Clippers.
Yeah, you're probably right.
I have a half decade's worth of evidence that says I'm right.
Right. Yeah. But then are the Warriors with, say they do the Butler move, which I'm back to, I don't think they should do that. Are they better
on the Warriors this season has been,
you should have seen after the second Kuminga 30-pointer. I was like, I think that's time for Steph to be a number 2. Time to just really reorient this offense. It's clear as day. And then check in tomorrow and I'll just be all the way back out. I can't be trusted. I want to say the Lakers, but they have a negative point differential. They've been super lucky relative to what their underlying metrics say. And then Davis and LeBron will miss time. So we just can't, and I'm not going to say the Warriors because I just established my opinion can't be valued on them. Is there an obvious one? We haven't said Phoenix yet. Yeah,
I think for good reason. They suck. They're man, they get nothing out of the center position right now. I was digging it because we considered putting them as a team that we just covered, but we were talking beforehand and I said, if we're not including the Lakers or the Warriors, the Suns have no business being on here. You look at their numbers, so with the big 3 on the court, they're minus 1.6 with an offense in the 56th percentile. Booker and Beal without Durant, minus 18.4 is their net rating, 37th percentile of offense. Beal and Durant without Booker, minus 16.9 in the 10th percentile of offense. Now the Booker and Durant, no Beal minutes, 96th percentile of offense, plus 6.9 overall. Here's I actually don't lay everything at the feet of Beal. I want to be clear. A lot of it, I think, has to just do with the center position. The big 3 is a plus 16.7 per 100 when Nurk is not on the court.
Yep.
And so there's just too many moving parts here to where, it's cool to see Osama Gadaro and Ryan Dunn doing some things. And then Royce O'Neal before getting injury has been really good. And if Grayson Allen's healthy, could he be really good? There's just, they might not have any you could say, they just need kind of anything out of the center position, they'll be fine. But the pathway to them making even incremental improvement is just so difficult. I don't think I would pick them. Is that the team? Because the 2 teams I'm leaning towards, and I'm just excluding the Clippers because they have the easiest question.
Mm-hmm.
I'm probably looking at the Spurs or the Kings because I'm sitting here with the Kings. And if they just went all in like if you put Jimmy Butler on this team instead of DeMar DeRozan, Kevin Huerter, and picks, I think like I don't know why they haven't been linked to him. Maybe he doesn't want to go there.
Yeah.
I think I might just settle on the Spurs because they feel like if De'Aaron Fox is available, that's the team for me. Like even more so than Houston because they don't have a long-term option at his spot. You could trade guys in terms of salary that don't really matter, and then you're trading picks. Maybe the prospect going out is Jeremy Sohan, and that's something they would haggle over. But just because you have Wemby, who, by the way, I don't know if anyone's been paying, like he might just finish in the top 5 of MVP voting, and that's a real thing that could happen. So I think it's one of those two teams for me. I don't feel great about any of these teams. The standings say it should be the Lakers. The point differential and the makeup of that team, though, just they've now decided that Austin Reeves and LeBron James are just going to do all, like in the offense will be fine with them doing all the I don't have a great answer here, I guess, is me stumbling through that.
I think if you've kind of framed it for me in a way that clarifies a little bit. If you think that a prerequisite for contention, I'm just making this argument up, is to have like a top 5 guy, then it should be the Spurs. Because Wemby, I think if you price in injury risks for the Lakers guys, if you price in same thing for like KD, Steph has slipped, like Halliburton isn't going to get back to that. Kawhi is the other one that can he play like one of the 5 best players in the league for a stretch? Like, yeah. So I think if you're just really honing in on and a top 5 guy is not available in trade right now. Jimmy Butler's not that. So like probably it should just be the Spurs and Clippers. And I feel like wildly uncomfortable about both of them.
Yeah, the Clippers are probably the answer just because Kawhi will come back and there's a chance he might be Kawhi. And there's all the teams we mentioned, like every other team on this list. I think you already said this is predicated on like they have to make some type of move.
I think so. I think so.
So is there one from that group? Is it the Spurs? That's the one that stands out from the other 7? I don't know.
It's probably the Clippers. I think
independent of them. Like
independent of them. Like I guess my gut is I don't want to pick the Spurs, but as I look around, I just think, well, like, if you had to bet on which player was going to be the most productive for the balance of this season, I think Wemby might just be the pick over Davis, over KD, over Steph, pricing in health, age regression, all that stuff. Like, right? That's not crazy, is it?
No, that's not crazy. And yet I still find myself drawn to the Warriors as the answer.
I was going to let you do it. I'm not going to say it.
I just feel like if they made the Jimmy, like, so do they feel like the team on this list that if they made the trade, it would go the longest way for them? Like if you add, so here's a good question. And the Lakers already made a trade. We know you add Cam Johnson to the Lakers or the Warriors, who ends up being the more dangerous team?
Probably the Warriors. I think the Warriors are better than the Lakers right now today. It's close. And I think he would serve a similar purpose on both teams. I guess the fit might be better on the Lakers, but I think the Warriors are better. And he would help them plenty. Like they shot 30% against the Cavs last night. It's ridiculous.
Who do you think is the team that would be most likely to make a bigger trade of this entire list?
I think the Warriors. I think this is a real thing. I think they're less likely to do that now than they were a week ago because Kuminga had 2 really good games. And it's just like, it's never going to end, Dan. It's never going to end.
I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be purposely inflammatory here. Fire everybody then if they're flying by the seat of their pants where these few games Kuminga closed the season well, we're just going to ride with him, but we don't trust him enough to extend him, but we're not going to trade him. He just had 2 really good games. Go ahead.
I was going to say, can I trot back out the argument I made all the time that I know bothered you? Well, but like, I don't think Jimmy Butler makes the Warriors a contender. So if that's if you disagree with that, then you absolutely should take. I mean, like he makes them better. He makes them. We would have put them in this group, but he's not. He's not the level of player and the age and the short-term risk and stuff. Like I don't feel like he gets you where you want to be. And if he's not available, Giannis, like that, someone better than Steph, like clearly. Like,
then my response would be then trade Steph.
Maybe
if you don't think Jimmy Butler even gives you makes you a legit title contender this season, because you're acquiring Jimmy Butler for this season and then probably next season is just we're making this a 2-season window, basically.
Yeah.
I disagree because I do think he makes them a contender. The thing that I've struggled the most with is if you're going from Wiggins to him, the defense I'm not worried about. But then like the plug and playness on offense, I still think Jimmy Butler is good enough to figure it out. And the way that Steph plays off everybody, you can go get someone even if Jimmy Butler proves that he needs to be ball dominant. Why don't you think he makes them a contender?
I think it's 50-50. It has some to do with him, but it all like equally, Steph and Draymond are both diminished. Like they are not like Steph, I think might make an all NBA team, but I'm not like, he just he has games where it's like the knees are clearly bothering him. He's going to be like a bad player tonight. Like he still has all this value as like defenses lose their shit. Like he's never going to be like hurtful, but he is not the same guy. Like he is not the offense unto himself player. Some of the like lineup numbers would argue with that. Draymond is like just absolutely catastrophic offensively now, like to the point where it outweighs the defense a lot of nights. So it's just like, it's not unforeseeable, but I think both of those guys being diminished because of age, because of just health, wear and tear, makes it so like the level of player you need to put them into roles that they need to be in on a great team now is higher than Jimmy Butler. It's like certainly higher than Zach LaVine, Brandon Ingram, Lauri Markkanen, like Paul George, even like all these guys that they've been linked to, however tenuously, I don't think are good enough. So saying like, well, we're just going to invest in Kuminga, it feels insane because like he's probably going to leave, and I wouldn't blame him if he got a good offer in restricted free agency. But like, if you do this for Butler now, you're consigning yourself to like some pretty brutal years after this. And I really don't feel like ownership wants that. That's the other thing. I think ownership likes Kuminga. The coaching staff isn't sold. And that's why we have this like vacillation. Not explaining my vacillation. I'm too emotional about it. But like, I think that's why the trigger hasn't been pulled, is there are real factions on either side of the Kuminga issue within the organization.
I agree with almost everything you say. Like in the longer term stuff, I totally agree with you. But in the short term, I just don't know. Like Jimmy Butler is still a top 20 guy. And like when you have Steph on this roster, I fail to see like you add Jimmy Butler to it without giving up Steph. Mm-hmm. And you could honestly, aside from Andrew Wiggins, because you need a salary, you could probably circle any other player and figure out how to keep them while getting the deal done still. If you're giving up enough pick equity, if you don't think it's worth it because of the length of that window, I just think there would be a window when you look at how we know this team is capable of defending at its peak. And who's more likely to lead a really good offense right now, Jonathan Kuminga or Jimmy Butler?
Yeah, it's Butler. I think that's right. I still am. I'm just not persuaded that, part of it is Boston and the Thunder are so good. It's just like, I can't, and you watch like Cleveland just boat race the Warriors last night. So that's fresh in mind too. Like what you don't realize watching your favorite team all the time without seeing like what a great team today looks like is that like, there's a difference. Like in the athleticism of these teams that we're talking about as like tier 1 contenders, the athleticism, the depth, they just move around the floor differently than your Warriors and Suns and Lakers and all these teams we're talking about. It's not just Golden State. And so that's made me think like this team just isn't, it's more than Butler. It's like, you got to regress everyone's age by 7 years. And then we'll look like, you know what I mean? It's just very stark sometimes.
I just don't understand the point then of like perpetual, because then the players you named are just, maybe they become available. Let's say Giannis is available. You can't get him. You're not going to even have close to the best offer.
I think the more we talk about it, the more it seems to me like ownership specifically, and you hear rumblings about this a lot, like guys like Anthony Slater will like allude to it. And that like ownership's belief in Kuminga is that like, he can be that guy. Like he can be the player around which we build the next great Warriors team. And man, unless you just catch every 30th game from him, I don't see how you can believe that.
I guess even his have you ever seen the level of feel and or playmaking that would make you think he can be central to that would be, because then who would be the closest analog to a player that's had those same flaws or concerns that you then is that Anthony Davis, who's been a better playmaker than Jonathan Kuminga still?
I think that the guys that believe in Kuminga believe that what he really is the guy you give the ball to every time and everything runs around him. And it'll be like an Edwards thing where he'll develop a passing eye, or like, cause Edwards didn't have any kind of feel really, like early on.
Year 4, he did.
That's the thing, is Kuminga has, so defenders of him would say he hasn't been like, the Warriors ask him to like cut and run hard and defend and be a connective passer. And that's not what he's supposed to be. Personally, I think there's a good case that actually is what he should do, and he could be great at that. But I think there's a belief that he is going to be a number one alpha guy, and you see it. Sometimes you do see it. It's just way more often you see him not read the floor, like not make other guys better. It's just, if he's 22 and you think he's been misused and that's why he hasn't developed that stuff, great. It's real hard for me to get on board with that.
That also comes back to a more like mainframe problem with the Warriors, where they did this thing with, well, you're saying they're trying to develop Kuminga in the way that you think he is best optimized. Like, remember the James Wiseman stuff where it's kind of, you drafted this guy who is not good at anything, like the tenets around which you build your offense. He's not good at them. And you never tailored really your offense or his usage to put him in his comfort zone. And aren't they then kind of doing the same thing with Kuminga? But it's different because you think that Kuminga is actually best suited in what they're trying to do. I
think people within the front office believe that. I don't think the coaching staff thinks Kuminga should do that. But that's what's happened the last handful of games, is they've put the ball in his hands a lot. And like, he's had a lot of great downhill stuff, has made some better decisions. The other problem is he just plays harder and better when he gets a lot of minutes, and that's not a great quality. Like, you want the guy to try hard no matter what. But like, the Warriors do not have a good track record of developing and implementing young players into their system. They've basically failed every single time. So the real thing might be, it's time to recognize that like Steph and Draymond are not good enough to define a system anymore. And you should just like figure out what your best players, even if they're young, do well and have them do that. I don't know.
Are the Warriors a title contender if in the trade for Jimmy Butler, they send out Draymond Green instead of Andrew Wiggins?
That's such a like not blasphemous question. Because the thing that makes me hesitate about the Butler trade is like, Wiggins is really good. And yes, you're better with Butler than him, but like, you're giving up something significant if you're giving up Wiggins. Draymond still matters a ton. We talked about this a little bit, I think, but like, he's been so bad offensively, Dan. Like, he's just, the turnovers, it's just been really brutal. Good thing we'll never have to worry about that, because they're just not going to trade him. I don't have like
the answer here is it's the Clippers, I think, because they have the most defined path to title contention. I would say after that, you have talked me out of the Warriors. Is the answer the Spurs then? Because of all the teams, it's the easiest for them to justify making a big move, because it's not just about this season and they're not already kind of asset depleted. Like, it might just be them. I still think the Kings I'm too high on the Kings, apparently.
I mean, feel a little broken lately.
Yeah. And you know what? Like, they are like the whole Mike Brown stuff. So, but like, I'm staring at the Lakers here. I do. Yeah. Is it weird that I trust the Lakers more than the Suns in this discussion?
No, because I agree with you. It's just a health thing for them. Like, we've established, if the Suns are all healthy, then it's still not great. But if you can have AD and LeBron and Reeves, I like what they're doing with Reeves now, and they go make a trade, then like, if they've already made one, then maybe they go make another one of that size or better. Like, you can see it.
Spurs, Clippers, and Lakers. Then that's what we're kind of settling on.
Let's do it.
That was fun. Do you want to, we spent so long on these lineup. Do you want to take it? Well, it went under 2 hours. So what do we talk about for the next 6 minutes? Really? Everyone's expecting
we burned 20 minutes on the Warriors. You can cut that out and make it its own thing if you want to. I don't know who's interested in hearing that. Thanks everybody. Let us know if we didn't tier these, but let us know if there was someone that like we should or shouldn't have discussed. We went pretty deep here now that we've added 8 other like also considereds. But can never be too thorough. We try, as evidenced by the length of this podcast. Make sure you rate, review, subscribe, follow us on all your socials. Check out both of us on Blue Sky. Dan has our handles there. Twitter too, I guess. I'm still going to call it Twitter. Make sure you're commenting on the YouTube videos. Over 6K subs, Dan informed me today. So just nowhere to go but up.
It's got to be like a record for a podcast on YouTube, right?
Easily, yeah.
I haven't seen anyone that has 6,000 followers.
Never. Tell your friends, tell your enemies. Shout out Frank Ntilikina. Apologies, Jared Allen.